Hello, everybody. Welcome to another episode of the Thriving Adoptees podcast. So today we're recording this on Thanksgiving, and Pat, all the way from Coney Island in New York, is sparing us a bit of his time to do this podcast on Thanksgiving Day. And this must be one of the weirdest things you've ever done on Thanksgiving Day, speaking to a guy 3,000 miles away near Old York when you're in New York.
Oh, really? I didn't even know there was a place called Old York.
Well, we just call it York.
Oh,
We just call it York. So yeah, it's about 12 miles away from us. But New York was originally New Amsterdam, wasn't it? I think, if I remember correctly.
Yeah.
And Coney Island, I always think of the Tom Hanks film in Big, because he went to Coney Island, and that's where he made the wish with the Zondar machine or whatever it was. That's right, is it? And that's how it
well, that's interesting, because Coney Island, that's how most people know Coney Island, not from necessarily that movie, but it is America's first playground. It is an amusement park today with a ball stadium and a concert amphitheater and an aquarium. But it's also a neighborhood, and it's a neighborhood in Brooklyn, New York. And what's behind me is the creek outside the neighborhood and the skyline of the neighborhood. Very few neighborhoods have their own skyline, but Coney Island's one of them.
Yeah.
And if you look at the far left, there's a parachute jump that overlooks one of the buildings. Right. So that's the only piece of the amusement park that I have in that picture.
Yeah. And have you done the parachute jump?
Oh no, it hasn't worked since 1962.
Oh, right.
And I was a little bit too young to go on it. I don't think so. I don't think my parents took me on it.
Yeah. Well, thank you for making time on Thanksgiving to do this. Could you introduce yourself to the listeners, please, Pat?
All right. Well, my name is Pat O'Brien. I am the executive director of an organization called the Adoptive and Foster Family Coalition of New York. We're a statewide agency that sort of is an umbrella of all the parent support groups who are adoptive, foster, kinship, and guardianship throughout the state of New York. And we provide support to adoptive and foster and kinship families. And we provide information, and we provide referrals. And we also run 4 regions of post-adoption services in the state of New York, covering 19 of New York's 62 counties.
Brilliant.
That's just in a nutshell. I mean, I could say a million more things, but I'll start with that.
And you're an adoptive dad, yeah?
Yes, I am. Yep.
Yeah. So do you mind me asking about your kids? How old are your kids, or is that kind of
I have one daughter, and she is 36 years old.
Right.
Actually, we both agree that we say she's 26 because she doesn't want to be 36, and I don't want to look like somebody who's old enough to have a child who's 36. So we sort of go with 26.
Yeah, that makes sense. I think when my wife hit 40, we went to New York actually to celebrate her 40th.
Oh wow!
And her auntie, who she's quite close to, said that she didn't feel it was appropriate to have a niece who was hitting 40. So you just take a few steps down, a few years back as well. So we're with you with that. Yeah. So when you hear this phrase, Pat, thriving adoptees, what comes to your mind when you hear that? It
was the first time that I absorbed that was what you called your show. And I guess it's a person who happens to have been adopted that is thriving in life. I mean, that's what pops into my head.
Yeah. And what do you understand by thriving? What does thriving mean to you?
Oh man, thriving is as a value or as a judgment as the person who's talking about it. Some people think thriving is somebody's got a good job. Some people think thriving is because they're at internal peace. So it totally depends on who's doing the defining. So, I actually don't know what that means, thriving.
Okay. What? It is a purely personal question, as I say. So yeah, thriving is in the eye of the beholder, like beauty is in the eye of the beholder, I guess.
Yeah.
It's really just, I was looking for something that summed up my take, in a really punchy two-word phrase, and also as a kickoff for a conversation about what helps adoptees do well in life, because we hear different sorts of stories. We hear across the whole end of the whole width of the spectrum, really. Is it, you talked about it being was one of the words you said, did you say internal peace? Did you say that word? Was that? Yeah. And I think guess thriving is, and you talked about good job as well. So I guess it's an inside state of mind, perhaps, and it has outward manifestations. So if we're doing well on the inside, then we're more likely to be doing well on the outside. What do you think helps adoptees do well on the inside?
Well, I probably having at least that one relationship that they can rely on. Hopefully it's with an adoptive parent. It's interesting when you use the word thriving as a conversation kickoff. Before I took this job, I've been involved with the coalition for 30 years. But before I took this job, I'm the founder of another organization called You Gotta Believe, and that's just meant to have somebody ask, well, what do you gotta believe in? And I said, well, you got to believe that every child deserves a family. And specifically, the organization that I started, it's every child on the verge of aging out of the foster care system deserves a family. And you can't even find a family for a child if you do not believe the families are there. And the ultimate thing that has the potential to lead to a thriving life is to have at least that one unconditionally committed parent who's going to be committed to you for the remainder of their lives. And hopefully that relationship, when that parent passes on, will be the thing that's fundamental to the continued thriving of that young person who's now a grown adult. So it's really about getting at least that one relationship, and if you have more than one, that's even more wonderful.
Yeah. Because a lot of people talk about healing taking place in relationships, don't they? That seems to be quite a big.
And that's apparently one of the fundamentals of resolving or getting healing during, if you had a traumatic early life, which almost all the kids that we worked with at You Gotta Believe did. And arguments can be made that every person separated from their original parent and original mom has had an element of trauma. That is one of the, nobody's totally healed, but that's the one that brings you closest to healing, is having a powerful relationship with somebody who totally and is completely unconditionally committed to you for the remainder of their lives.
Yeah. I mean, I was talking to an adoptive mum here in the UK this morning for the podcast, and she was talking about the thing that she wanted her her daughter's 30 years behind your daughter. She's a 6-year-old daughter, and she wants her daughter to know that she is committed to her daughter. So that the daughter's having some challenges in life, tends towards anger, so she's kind of acting out and stuff like that. And what she talked about was that she wants her daughter to know that she is unconditionally there. She's unconditionally there for.
Right. Well, I mean, and do you have any idea how old that daughter was when that daughter moved in?
Good question. I don't know. I mean, but I think it wasn't. I think she's 6 now. I think it was. I get the feeling that it was maybe she was 2 or 4. It wasn't.
All right. Well,
it wasn't straight. It wasn't from birth.
that unconditional commitment is not necessarily something I mean, it's good to talk about it, but it's also the only way you can prove it exists is to be there always, So at 16 and 26, she says the same thing, but what's more important is that she did the same thing,
Yeah.
And that's always being there.
Yeah. I think that's so important, isn't it? We're talking really here about feeling like we belong, not
Exactly.
being told, not being told we belong, or
Right.
that our parents are committed, but us actually feeling it.
And there's nothing wrong with sharing that information with your child, but your child's going to feel it as time moves on. Now, if a child moved in at 2 years old, that 6-year-old knows something is missing. They just don't know what it is or how to put it into words or even recall those first 2 years of life. But there's an internal, not only intuition, because she lived the experience. So, but trying to convince a 6-year-old that you are unconditionally committed doesn't help whatever feeling might be going on that's leading to that particular anger in that particular 6-year-old.
Yeah. I don't think I don't think she used the word committed. Because you wouldn't use the word like committed with a 6-year-old. It was, I think that she's there. She'll be there no matter what.
Right.
Her parents are there for her no matter what. How old were you when you adopted your daughter, Pat?
How old was I?
Oh, sorry. How old was she?
Oh,
sorry. How old was she?
She after she was released from the hospital. Yeah. She was placed with me and my wife at the time.
Yeah, that's good. Okay. So I think this. I just want to go back a step then, because I think that a lot of times, I hear parents saying things like, I've told them, I've told them whatever it is that they've told their kids, but the kids aren't getting it. The kids aren't hearing what we're saying. They're not experiencing, they're not feeling it. They're not experiencing, and so I guess it's a bit like perhaps a funny analogy, a strange analogy, but like the politicians. Talk is cheap, isn't it? It's deeds. It's deeds that matter, and it's deeds. Us, our kids, seeing that we're there for them is what really counts, and also getting the kids to see that they are loved. Actually, them seeing stuff for themselves. So rather than us just talking at them, they need to act. The message needs to.
It's always okay to say something, but you probably should spend as much time listening if a child's willing to talk about their feelings. A lot of adoptive parents take feelings personally when they should treasure the idea of their children actually expressing feelings to them, because that means the person is truly connecting with their child because they're listening. But where a lot of adoptive parents make mistakes is when a child says, I don't feel loved, or I don't feel like I belong, or I feel, they accept it as an almost internalizes it as an insult rather than truly listening, because it's the truly listening and trying to really be curious about what's going on in their mind is the most significant relationship building that anybody can do with their child. And so a lot of times adoptive parents are functioning from their own unresolved losses and grief. Often adoptive parents come to this as the other alternative to parenting after they try to become a parent in the original way, which is way almost everybody tries to become a parent, and that's through biological means. And then only when you understand that you're not going to have a biological child, but you still want to be a parent, you go to an alternative way to become a parent, and a lot of folks choose adoption, and but they don't choose it in a way where a lot of times the loss of not having a biological child was ever grieved properly. And if you think about it, adoptive parents and adopted persons really do have a lot in common on the grief level, and trying to understand your child's whatever it is, uncomfortability, not feeling like they belong, is to not ever take that personally, but really be genuinely curious about, let's explore that further, particularly if they're willing to talk to you about it, which is a wonderful gold mine if you have a child that wants to talk to you about their feelings.
Yeah. So I've heard that. I've heard that somebody else said that to me, that the child that wants to talk, see the child that wants to talk, that's a great sign. That is actually a sign that they are they're comfortable in talking about it. They may not be,
especially if they're willing to talk to you, their parent. Absolutely, I think that's really a wonderful thing.
Yeah. So I've heard that this with all, like with kids who are adopted later on, so that initially they may not want to go to talk. They may not want to talk, and people talk about this being the honeymoon period, and then some stuff comes up, and they're talking, and they're expressing their their behaving out, or they're acting out, whatever, or they're talking about it, and the parent thinks that something has actually gone wrong, but it isn't. The fact that they're comfortable enough to talk is a sign that it's going right.
Yeah, I mean, and like you bring in the factor of the age that the child moves in. When we place let's say 16-year-olds, which that was the average age of the children that we placed, that you got to believe, they so when intellectually the children actually know that whatever internal turmoil they have, the parents that we placed them with didn't cause the trauma. However, they still are going to do things that upset the parents, and at least intellectually our parents can understand that they're really there for the healing, because they didn't necessarily cause the trauma, but because they walked into this child's life as a parent who's going to be there forever, that now the work begins. So it's a complicated relationship. I mean, it's a complicated series of issues that parents and children go through in adoption. But we need for the parents to be the open-minded ones. We need the parents to be the listeners. We need the parents to be the curious people, the accepting people, hopefully the playful people, and most of all, the empathetic people. So we have a very powerful role that parents play if they can, resolve some of their own traumas and losses.
Yeah. For me, this is kind of the key, because it's how in any relationship. So me and my missus haven't got any kids, but I can only impact me, right? I can only be sovereign of my own state, whatever that. I don't know. I've never come up with that word before. But I can only influence me, right? I mean, so it's about me. It's not about me trying to change her. I can only change myself, right? Mm-hmm. So I hear this quite a lot in some circles. People talk about the grief that like you mentioned, that the grief that adoptive parents have come to adoption through this grief. And we had a great episode with a lady called Holly and Petrie, and her podcast was unpacking our own baggage as adopted parents. So I see quite a lot in.
Well, now that is very, very interesting. You said as adoptive parents uncovering our own baggage.
Yeah, that's what she said. Yeah,
that's right. No, I can't tell you how much when we used to train parents, take 16-year-olds, everybody talked about a 16-year-old coming with 16 years worth of baggage, But then I would say to that adoptive parent, but you're 45 years old. So you're coming to the relationship with 45 years worth of baggage. And it's nice that was recognized, because everybody brings their own baggage to relationships. It's just that in the parent relationship, we have a deeper responsibility to heal ourselves if our wounds are getting in the way of the relationship.
Yeah. So, I mean, I use the word kind of self-awareness for this, this kind of stuff, because what I see in the kind of the adoption community is there's a lot of emphasis on, you know, the kid's primal wound, for want of a better word. There's a lot of emphasis on kind of like trauma training, and there's a lot of emphasis on like parenting kind of stuff. But there seems to be, in my opinion, that there's less in this kind of self-awareness space. Would you agree with that? Is that just my
the whole emphasis on trauma has transformed our field. Picture 15 years ago, nobody talked about it at all. And the fact is, people have to come to some greater awareness on, it's not just our children who've been traumatized, but a lot of us have in our losses and in our own upbringing. So, and that's what leads to greater self-awareness, is not just to focus on your children's traumas and losses, but to understand you have your own, and you don't get to greater self-awareness unless you recognize that. And the other thing about Primal Wound, which was actually a book that was written in 1993, so it's been around now for almost 30 years. I didn't discover the book until, over a decade after it was written. And then when I read the book, I just could not believe how accurate it was. And that book was not written by an adopted person. That book was written by an adoptive parent who took home a 3-day-old from a hospital. And it was just very, very powerful to recognize that even if life has been perfect since 3 days old, you cannot not acknowledge there was a trauma before they arrived, you know. And that's what the idea of primal wound brings to our field. Yeah.
So I've got a bit of a different take on the primal wound, and so if you want to check this out, I'm talking to the listeners now. If you want to check that out, have a look in the back catalogue of the Thriving Adoptees. They've got a couple of things on that. And I want to go back to the parents' kind of self-awareness stuff, and where I came up with this phrase a couple of weeks ago, for us to be trauma informed but hope obsessed, because to me there seems to be
trauma informed and hope obsessed.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, because for me, there seems to be, my personal experience was that believing that I went down a trauma rabbit hole myself, right? And the world got darker and darker, and what we focus on gets bigger, right? What we focus our minds on gets bigger, like a magnifying glass enlarges anything that we're looking at it. And if what I see is or what I've done, right, is I've focused on trauma. I focused on the primal wound, and that's made my life actually darker until I turned around.
I'm not talking about focusing the adopted person on primal wound or trauma. I just think that parents have to understand it to help understand their child's mind a little bit better, because their children often do not have a clue what primal wound is or how trauma affected their lives. But in regard to self-actualization, I mean, when we prepared parents to take 16-year-olds, we spent most of our time asking the parents to explore their own lives and their own triggers and their own things, because this child will absolutely bring more of that to you if you don't understand yourself better. So So I'm not looking for adopted persons to understand trauma better, or even understand the primal wound, and definitely not obsess on it. But I definitely want their parents to know about it.
Yeah, me too, definitely. So what were the most, what were the most useful points that that you could, what are the most useful points that you could share from that training with me on this podcast? What could, because obviously this is a deep subject, and I'm just wondering what it is you could share.
And by the way, I agree with your thesis that when what you focus your attention on becomes bigger. So I totally get that. What I used to train parents about is when your child moves in and you're experiencing painful emotions, painful feelings, anger, grief, fear, that don't go directly and say that's about your child. Understand that your child's presence is kicking these feelings off, but those feelings were already there. It's sort of like when you squeeze an orange. You can get seeds, you can get pulp, you can get juice out of that orange. This child's squeezing you, and they're getting anger, and they're getting sadness, they're getting grief, they're getting fear. But it's not because the child put that there. That was already there. And your child's presence is kicking it off. And your responsibility to get the greatest self-actualization is to really try to learn what that's all about. Because, yes, your child's presence is materializing at this moment in your life, but they didn't put that pain there. That pain was already there, unexplored, unresolved. And now the gift of your child is to help you become a better person by understanding what that pain's really all about.
Yeah. And what more light can you, so somebody's listening, assume that somebody's listening to you now, saying, yeah, I can see that. I can see how, I can see the truth in what Pat's saying. What should I be doing about this if I'm an adopted parent? That's listening?
Sometimes it's simple as asking why. Why am I truly this upset? And often when adoptive parents are involved, they never really fully resolve their own pain and loss, which was a trauma for them. But it's really about grief of not having the child that you had expected to have. And then because you couldn't have a child biologically. I mean, the culture says, especially a culture like the culture you guys live in, everything is so important to be genetically related. I mean, can you imagine having a king or a queen who was adopted by somebody? I don't know if that's ever happened, and you know your history better than I do, but the culture breeds how important biological connection is. So it's a logical thing to be grieving. And, a lot of people refer to adoptive parents as adopting their second choice. Like the adopted person was the second choice. The adopted child was their second choice. And I truly believe my adopted daughter was my only choice. I couldn't in this world, if I was going to stay married to the person I was going to stay married to, ever have a biological child. But it was very important for me to raise children or a child. And that was my only choice. And it turned out to be the best thing that ever happened to me. But that didn't mean there wasn't grief involved in not having the ability to do it the original way. And for me, being the man, it was a lot easier on me because I was not the one that couldn't lead to a biological child. So I had to have empathy for my wife who couldn't, and accept that our only way to become parents, and we both wanted to be parents, was to adopt our daughter. So she was never, in my mind, ever a second choice for us, but she was the only choice for us.
Yeah. Do some parents back away from these feelings? Like, we seem to have a society where, especially all the social media stuff, we're trying to put a brave face on things. We've become, as a mentor of mine over on the other side of the US, he talks about, a guy called Michael Neal talks about us becoming emotophobic. Like we're scared about being scared. We're scared about being angry. We back away from the tough stuff rather than diving through the tough stuff.
Yeah.
To see, because diving through the tough stuff is the way that we come out of the other side.
Well, I tell you, you sound like a guy that understands the self-actualization movement. Well, one of the most powerful books I've ever read was a big hit in the and it's on the New York Times bestseller list for over a decade. And the first word of the book simply said, "Life is difficult," you know. And the book was called The Road Less Traveled. And we do spend an enormous amount of our lives trying to avoid pain and going around it, rather than taking the road less traveled and go through it and really see what we can learn about ourselves. If you're a very concrete, intellectual, emotional type of person, to learn about yourself. Or if you're a deeper person, maybe perhaps a spiritual person, you can look at it as, what is my creator trying to tell me? Because I'm supposed to be feeling joy and happiness, but now I'm angry, and now I'm deeply grief-stricken, or I'm actually afraid and I have anxiety. That's a message. That's a common language. Well, no matter whether you speak Spanish or English or Korean, or you understand the language of anger, fear, pain, anxiety. I just think that as one of the great gifts that can be brought to us. And sometimes it's not until our children move in that we almost are forced to deal with it. And if we don't deal with it, sometimes that leads to not the best relationships.
Yeah. Is that book Scott Peck or somebody like that?
Yes, it is Scott Peck.
Yeah. I've heard it quoted. I've never read it. My favorite author at the moment is a guy called Rupert Spira. Have you heard of him?
No, I have not. Okay. Yeah.
So it's Spira. Sorry, Spira, and he makes a distinction. So you talk. The reason I mentioned his name is because you're talking about self-actualization, and he is big on identity. And self, like the ultimate self. So he wouldn't be he would never use the word like self-actualization, but right. He would use the word self, right? So he talks about us being like a computer screen, right? And that's who we are, and the movie is playing on the computer screen. Right? That's where all the drama is. That's where all our thoughts and feelings, and we're caught up in the story of what's going on in our life, and we are essentially distracted from the open space of the screen by the drama of what's being projected on it. Does that make any?
Well, I haven't read the book, so but I mean, there's a lot of theories out there, and that sounds like an interesting one. And I actually probably misheard something you said earlier today. I thought you had started out using the word self-actualization, but you did say self-something. So I apologize if I misheard you.
Yeah. I think I used the word self-awareness.
Awareness. Okay, great. Yes.
I think I used the word self-awareness.
Yes, you did. And that's an excellent way of framing it as well.
Yeah. And the key thing for me is the fact that we are not our trauma. So I bandy a word like self-awareness around. You talk about self-actualization. We talk about self. Well, for me, it's the fact that whoever we are not our trauma. Trauma is something.
Oh, yeah.
trauma that has happened is something that's happened
that happens.
So some people talk about trauma from the perspective of it being an event. Some people talk about, you know, traumatic trauma from a sense of anger or fear. Some people talk about it about feelings, but we aren't what happened to us. So we are not a traumatic event, and we are not our feelings, because like our feelings come and go.
Well, yeah, I mean, we're only not our feelings if we're not doing anything destructive with our anger, if we're not doing anything destructive with ignoring our grief and fear, I mean, ignoring our grief and loss, and we're not doing anything destructive when we're ignoring great anxiety, you know. But other than that, our painful emotions really do need to be dealt with to have greater self-awareness.
Yeah,
especially when you're a parent.
We talked about going through them. So for me, it's like
and again, I'm talking about the parent.
Yeah,
I think the person who's actually the most traumatized, which is often our children, they're going to discover in their own time what this is all about. But we need the parents to understand it, you know, pretty much right away.
Yeah,
and very often they do not.
No. As I was thinking about this, I was thinking that it's a bit like being in a plane, seeing a dark cloud ahead of us, and going through the turbulence, like not clean air turbulence like you sometimes get, but going through the turbulence of the cloud in the plane, to realize rather than dodging it, rather than trying to go around it, because we think that the cloud,
right,
we think that the trauma is going to be the undoing of us, but we go through it. We experience that turbulence. It may be more than we thought, but we come out of it at the other side, because like we're the blue sky. We're not the trauma of our feelings.
Well, you know, that's an interesting analogy. I like to reckon and believe that the pilot is the parent in that role, and that pilot parent knows you go through that darkness, there's going to be light on the other side. Whereas if I'm on the plane, I really like to be in the back with shade down and just keep my eyes closed and just wait till it's over. But I'm having a lot of faith in the parent in the front who knows what he's doing. And that's sort of what we'd like for relationships to be with parents and their children.
Yeah. I love the way you built on my analogy. You made it more relevant to an adoptive parent, because obviously I'm not a parent, never mind an adoptive parent. So I think it's a great extension of the analogy that makes it more valid for valuable to the parents, because that's what we're doing. You know, leaders lead. Leaders go first, and as a parent, as any sort of parent, you know, biological or adoptive parent, you got to be the leader. That's your,
that's true,
kind of like your own life. And then perhaps you know, we as the child gets older, you know, the leader creates another leader rather than a follower when they've come through when the kids have come through the tricky stuff, then they become a leader too.
Yeah, well, you always hope, but you're right. We need parents to be leaders. We need parents to you know, to be mentors and role models and all of those things. Yeah, that's for sure.
I just want to, I don't know, because I was yittering on a bit, and I don't think I made the analogy completely clear, right? We are the blue sky. We're not.
And we being who?
We, self.
Okay.
Self. What I mean is the self. By the self, I mean the open space where the thoughts and feelings arise. Because we're focused. What I'm advocating is that we focus on the openness of who we are rather than the dark thoughts and feelings that we have. Maybe a bit way out.
Yeah, it might be above my pay grade to, because I never had a real deep discussion with you on any of these issues. But so I'll say fine. I mean, it's probably ironic that I have a gray sky behind me, because most often, things are not totally blue and not totally dark. So it's probably the perfect picture behind me.
Yeah. So I'm just conscious of time, and you've given so much time up on a Thanksgiving to do this, and you're going off to some event, you're saying. So is there anything else that you'd like to bring us into a close with? So any little gems that you'd like to share with adoptive parents listening?
I do a radio broadcast every Sunday night, and maybe what I could do is just read a couple of quotes that I end every broadcast with, if that's okay with you.
Yeah, great. Go for it.
Yeah. And I don't want to screw it up, so I'm just looking it up right now. And okay, just open it up. And this is one of my favorite quotes, is because we spend a lot of us have had trauma when we were kids because our parents did things that weren't horrible, but they were really quick with their hands, and that never works when a child has any form of trauma. If you do what your parents did, it just is not going to work out, and it's not going to enhance the relationship. And I'm talking about parents who might smack you around, yell and scream at you, that type of thing. So I always end the broadcast with, we parent children by the power of our example and not by the example of our power. And I also like to end with what I call the well, I was going to say it was a quote, but the second thought is not actually a thought at all. It's the child of early life trauma and loss prayer, and that prayer is to their parents. May you love me the most when I seem to deserve it the least, because that's when I need it the most. And that's really helping the parents understand that they are, like you said, they are the leaders. They have to lead, and part of leading is understanding that during those days where your child is most trying is the day that your child needs your love and your commitment and your acceptance and your empathy the absolute most. So
that's beautiful.
Thank you.
It's beautiful. Thanks, Pat, and enjoy the rest of your Thanksgiving.
I will. Thank you so much, Simon.
You're a star. Thank you very much. Bye-bye.
Okay.